Thank you everyone for watching this session today, the speaker series, COVID Response in Yarra. My name is Alycia Ashcroft and I am a project officer at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, which will be referred to as the NJC through a lot of today. I am joined by a wonderful panel who I will introduce and interview shortly, but before I do, I'm going to give a little brief introduction as to why we're all here today. And just please note that we are discussing the beginning of the pandemic. And as us as a group were going through what this would look like, it did really awaken a lot of memories for us and some that we'd really suppressed. So this discussion may bring up for you that time, and while we are looking to celebrate the community and service providers, some of it may be difficult to hear or may unearth some things you're not really ready to remember from 2020 onwards. So if you do feel as though you need help, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 and seek comfort with your own community of friends and family. And I'll put that number up at the end of the presentation as well. The Neighbourhood Justice Centre, the NJC, in essence is a one-stop shop. We have a court, a range of community support services, legal services, corrections and specialised teams who focus on peacemaking, problem solving, crime prevention, community engagement and innovation. We sit as part of Magistrates Court of Victoria and our doors opened back in 2007. And our model operates under the practice of community justice. And we're currently Australia's only community justice centre. We serve our local community and many of our on-site services see clients who do not come through the court. We partner with local organisations and residents on community capacity building projects, education and crime prevention initiatives. Our jurisdiction is the City of Yarra, the outline that you see on your screens now. As of the 2021 census, the City of Yarra is home to an estimated 91,000 residents, 43% of who are renting, and over 8% of the population are in social and public housing. It's a vibrant city fringe local government area with thriving high streets packed with cafes, bars, live music venues, restaurants, retailers, festivals and events, street markets, a lot of which are run by small businesses. Like everyone, with the rest of the world and in Victoria, we shut down in March 2020. It was up to community, local service providers and governments to change their priorities and pivot their services to meet the changing and challenging needs of our communities. The NJC developed the Yarra COVID-19 Community Organisation Response Network. This network consisted of 33 organisations and departments at the height of its engagement, and there were over 85 members from these organisations within it. The idea was to combat the emerging issues as they arose. As we all knew back then, we were going into unprecedented times. We wanted to pull the resources of Yarra into one place to ensure we were as effective as possible in serving our community. We had the support of Yarra City Council in convening this group, and it became a regular online meeting space to combat emerging issues such as food security, digital access and digital literacy, emergency planning for further lockdowns, ensuring good communications for residents around restrictions and then later vaccinations, employment issues and unemployment issues, family violence concerns and youth engagement. Every organisation and member of this network was critical to ensuring the community's needs were met throughout the pandemic's first few years. Of course, if we could have everyone on this panel today, we would. So before I introduce our speakers, we all would like to say thank you to every member of the COVID-19 Community Organisation Response Network in Yarra. You all worked tirelessly to ensure the Yarra community was fed, had access to laptops and devices for homework and work, to ensure there was correct, clear information for residents, and so much more. Thank you for everything you did and how you contributed to this network. A specific shout out to our local neighbourhood houses, Belgium Avenue Neighbourhood House, who ran multiple food programs, and our local healthcare providers, CoHealth and North Richmond Community Health, for their tireless efforts, including the creation of the concierge health desks. Now to our panel. I'm joined today by the NJC's General Manager, Rachel Powning. Rachel is responsible for leadership of the NJC, engagement with the broader community, and widely promoting the benefits of a community justice approach. Rachel's career is focused on social justice. She's worked in leadership roles in government and international NGOs. She was nominated for a City of Yarra International Women's Day Award for her role in leading the Yarra COVID Community Response Network. Victoria Police's Lloyd Hanmer, a senior sergeant who is currently in a family violence training officer role. Lloyd has 18 years of operational frontline policing experience, predominantly in the Yarra and inner northern areas. He's been heavily involved with several community groups and meetings, including the North Richmond Precinct Community Reference Group, the North Richmond Housing Estate Local Safety Committee, the Yarra Local Safety Reference Group, and was an active member of the Yarra COVID Community Response Network. We have Yarra City Council's Cristina del Frate. She's the Senior Coordinator of the Community Development Team with portfolios in multicultural partnerships, neighbourhood houses, community grants, LGBTIQA+ partnerships, capacity building and homelessness. She's passionate about celebrating diversity and building inclusion into all endeavours. Cristina was an active member throughout the lifespan of the COVID-19 Community Response Network. And we also have Kylie Carlson, who is Yarra Library's Senior Coordinator of Community Engagement and Partnerships. She's an innovative strategic leader and strong advocate for the difference libraries can make in people's lives. Kylie's passionate about community and making a positive difference, however big or small. Kylie and her team worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic and was, of course, a very active member of the COVID-19 Community Response Network. Welcome to our panel today. So I will dive right in. As I mentioned, as we all went into lockdown, most of us were really unprepared and organisations really unsure on what we would do. And it really did come down to different community organisations, governments, councils and public servants and businesses to change the way they served their communities rapidly. Cristina, what was the first reactions from council and your team when we went into that first lockdown? And what were the priorities and initial response that needed to be put into action?
Thanks, Alycia. Yeah, it was quite a time, wasn't it? And I was just mentioning before, when we were just chatting before this, how I had to really cast my mind back. It wasn't that long ago, but I really had to think hard about what went on, because there was a lot going on. I'm stating the obvious, it was coming at us from every angle. And I guess we had the emergency management responsibility, which we'll talk about a bit later if we have time. But then there was also just the local government as the first port of government that's closest to the community, you know, supporting our community. What do we do? What do we need to do? This is new stuff. What do people need? So I guess that was the thought that was going through everyone's minds. But it was fantastic in that, like everyone else in Yarra, service providers, community members, neighbours, everyone really banded together and worked hard and worked very quickly. And one of the first things that council did was develop a COVID response plan, which was called the COVID Economic and Community Support Package, which was developed right across all levels and tiers and teams of council. I think we developed something like 20 to 30 actions. The whole package in itself cost around $7.4 million. And that package had a few key components. One of them was around supporting Yarra's business community. Another part of it was around providing financial supports and fee waivers to residents. So, you know, there was a development of a hardship policy as well there. So There was a whole range of actions in that area. And then in the third part of it was around a range of community supports that I was probably more focused in. And look, I should have prefaced all of this with saying I'm going to miss a few things because there was a lot going on, and I can really only speak to the key things that I was mostly involved in. So my apologies to anyone if I've missed out. There was a great deal of work and collaboration. So the community supports included a range of things, trying to, I guess, have a multi-pronged approach and coming at it in terms of donations of funds, for example, to the Inner North Community Foundation. They provide a lot of community supports, emergency relief right throughout Darebin, Moreland and Yarra. And so we wanted to bolster the great work that they do. Other aspects of it included support to local agencies so that they can continue delivering their services, and how they can continue to do that and pivot, the word of the pandemic. So, you know, that might have meant, you know, providing some labour support or providing a little bit of more financial support or other resources, you know, storage and use of our facilities. Then the other aspect, I guess, is around assisting coordination of delivered meals from various agencies, you know, and we can talk a bit more about that later on. And a massive endeavour. I'm really just not doing it justice, but so many of the great organisations within Yarra had to shut down through that time, and so some of that involved use of our venues and facilities, and use of staff at council to do some of that, as well as developing our own emergency response in that space. I guess the biggest program that I was involved in is the quick response COVID grants, and that was developed very quickly to go out, you know, within a month or so of everyone sort of going into lockdowns, and tried to cover those areas which you mentioned earlier with the highest need. So there were family violence grants, there were grants to support the arts community, the arts sector, so creative business and creative community grants, promoting food security, so bolstering that again, because we knew that was going to be a massive impact. There were one-off grants for schools, there was local business and precinct support grants, grants supporting people seeking asylum and other visa holders who fall through the cracks. You know, some other examples were, you know, buying masks when masks couldn't be bought. I don't know if you remember back then, we couldn't buy hand sanitizer and masks. They were really scarce. So buying a whole heap of them and, you know, giving them to Launch Housing to share with the rough sleeping community. So there, I won't go on too long. I could go on forever, but that's sort of a very quick snapshot. I mean, I should mention that right across council, age and disability services, youth services, all those front-facing services, libraries, you know, having to again pivot. How do we support the community? What can we do instead of meeting and gathering in groups? I might leave it there. There's more I could go on, but I know everyone else has to have a go as well.
No, that's great. Thank you, Cristina. And we will expand on some of those as well as we go through. I'll ask Lloyd now. With Victoria Police, you were also thrown into really new territory. What was that like?
Yeah, we definitely found ourselves in a very new policing environment that we hadn't previously. So, you know, Cho became a very big sort of catchword, the Chief Health Officer. So, obviously, he's always had those powers under the Act. So, but I've never found myself in a policing environment where we've had to enforce those. So, we definitely found ourselves in an environment which I hadn't experienced before in my policing career. So, and that was constantly evolving, as you know, people probably remember those chief officers' directions were changing on a fairly regular basis. So we had to keep fairly up to date with what was being put out there, and how we would go about trying to enforce those restrictions, I suppose. So that was probably new to me, and probably a lot of us in the organisation, just having working under those directions and how we were going to enforce those. So, so that not only that, it was also we had to review some of our own internal practices and processes. Obviously, we were still working, we were still frontline, we were still having to respond to jobs. So it was all new, and it was a little bit of a scary time. So having to respond to potentially people that had COVID and things like that. So and potentially having people that had COVID in custody and things like that. So we had to review a lot of our own internal practices and processes to make sure that we weren't exposing our member to some of the risks of potentially contracting the virus, especially early on when there wasn't a lot known. So, so yeah, it was a different time for us, and yeah, so we had to learn and adapt fairly quickly, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I can imagine. I think, like all of us, having to change and pivot, as Cristina said, the word of the pandemic. Kylie, I'll come over to you now. Yarra libraries are such a vibrant hub for the community. Having to shut down, what were your initial thoughts and what went through your mind, and what were those concerns that you were having?
Yeah, sure. I think we were all in a bit of state of shock, and we literally got a call 2 hours prior to say you need to shut all your branches. Now, that's about 60 staff that we needed to send home and mobilise. The information that we were given was work from home, not being in on site, but we were still navigating that too. It wasn't very clear. All we knew was we were deemed a non-essential service and we had to close our doors. So I think it was shock and also anger. How dare they tell us we were unessential? We are essential. You ask anybody that comes into our libraries, our most vulnerable community members come into our libraries because we are a free open service. We are access to internet and Wi-Fi and space and warmth and all of those things. So yeah, there was a lot of things that went through my mind and also my manager's mind at the time. Fliss, our director, got pulled into an emergency response role, and she stepped into director role and I stepped into acting manager. So it all happened within a couple of hours. It was very, very quick and really upsetting. All of our staff also were attached. None of them had laptops. So all of them had desk PCs. So it was quite a feat to just even try and get them onto the internet. And a lot of them didn't have internet either at home or access to a laptop at home too. So yeah, they were those initial thoughts. And then it went to what's going to happen to those community members that are going to turn up the next day and the next day, and they need to access information. They need to access the computers, especially our community that experience homelessness. They spend a lot of time in our libraries every day because we are either warm or cool space. We are that link to the internet and information. People that needed their books. Yeah, it was just quite a shock, really. And I think we switched very quickly into responding by, okay, how do we get information out to our most vulnerable community members quickly? Because a lot of them didn't have access to internet and information. So it's like, how do we get out to them now? So I guess that was the initial response. And really, in all of these things, there's always opportunity in crisis. It was like, how can we create some opportunity here? How can we put the library at the heart of our community? How can we be what our community need us to be? So often we get into fight or flight response with these things. Definitely Fliss and myself, our response is fight. Get out there and fight for our community and our service. And we were very determined to prove that we are essential. So it turned into a big advocacy piece as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kylie. And over to Rachel now. The NJC, we're a place-based, model. That's how we operate. Sending staff home, to work from home. How did the NJC really react to this, and what were some of those initial concerns around court users and community access?
Yeah, thanks, Alycia. Well, pretty much similar experience to Kylie, I think. Firstly, the first concern was the staff and how staff would manage, and of course, logistically, how we were going to reorganise staff to work off-site. We were fortunate in that most staff had laptops and some staff already did a little bit of work from home. So that in itself was a pretty easy transition. Although I was reflecting when we spoke last week about how our first contact with all staff was via a conference call, because at that stage, courts certainly, or magistrates court certainly wasn't using Zoom, and we had some issues with Teams. So it's a pretty amusing thing to remember that just that 2.5 years ago or whatever, we were contacting all staff using conference calls. Quite amusing. Anyway, so that was our first experience of that. We were, of course, really worried about the community and the court users, and there was, you know, for me, there was that sense of having to abandon post, really. I think the same feeling that Kylie probably had there. So we were fortunate in that courts were considered an essential service, but we didn't know for sure that all magistrates' courts would stay open. And I think that was always the intention of the chief, which was great, but we weren't sure for the first month or so. But we did remain open, and so then the transition of moving to court online was a huge change for all of the staff at the NJC, and obviously a big change for Magistrates Court generally. So we had to look at the new practice directions that come from the Chief Magistrate to work out which matters stay online, which are going to be heard in person, and also look at the Chief Health Officer advice, of course, and all of the state government requirements. So there was a lot of information to pull in. And yeah, really, we'll talk more about the network, setting up the network in a moment, but that was a very important role that we felt we could play to continue that connection with the community. Yes, that's how it all started.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I did a little brief synopsis at the beginning about the COVID-19 Community Response Network, but I guess now's a good time to get you, Rachel, to just expand a little bit on the reasons for starting the network, and I guess how we went about inviting different organisations and teams onto it.
Yeah, sure. So, look, we were very mindful that, as Kylie's explained, that council is, local government's generally the first line of response for emergencies. We were also really aware, though, that council was dealing with, given the breadth of services they provide, dealing with that really detailed and complex change of service delivery. And so I felt that there was a role that the NJC could play, and fortunate or not, I'm not sure, but having worked in international NGOs, I'd had experience of working in emergencies as in a response sense, of course. And so I felt that I had some skills that I could bring, and Alycia, yourself and others in your team developed this proposal that we would set up this network. So we had the resources, we had the skills, we had some people who had the time. So it was an obvious thing for us to do. And we opened it up for any service providers in Yarra. So as many of you know, we had lots of agencies that first line responders in Yarra. We had representatives from state departments. We had representatives from council, of course. And essentially what it was about was coming together to problem solve, really just talk about what resources we had as a network and how we could share those resources, hear from police about what they were seeing on the ground. So it was resource sharing, prevention, looking at strategies as to how we could support the community, prevent any ongoing crises, I guess. And you know, for me, it definitely, and I hope for others, it provided place where we could talk as providers, as service deliverers, about the stresses we were feeling and the responsibility and the weight of that. So it was really therapeutic, really, as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. And I do remember Kylie did mention last time we spoke about this, how it was so nice to have everyone in this virtual room regularly, so you didn't feel isolated or alone in trying to deliver services to the community. And as you said, it did work as a therapeutic model as well.
And I think it was the first time that services really interacted at some points as well, and it created a sense of community that we needed too. We were trying to be something for our community, but we needed our own network and our own community. So for me, it was invaluable to hear what was going on the ground, connect with services, and not try and do everything in silos or, you know, on your own, but really connecting in with everybody else's resources. And for me, it was an invaluable group, and still is. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Kylie. Well, off of that, I think I will come to you again now anyway to talk a little bit more about, you know, what libraries did going into the lockdowns, because you really did change what everyday business looked like. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, look, it was, you know, we were really concerned about our community. We were really concerned about our providers and our partners that we'd been working with up until that point, and also our staff. There was so much fear, and so it was navigating that, getting them home, keeping them calm, working out whether we could even be on site. There was lots of mixed messaging. So some library services were sending their staff in but had the doors closed. There was a lot of anxiety around that, making decisions around, do we stay home? Can we go in? For me, it was really about getting to our most vulnerable communities. So we have the largest amount of social housing in Victoria across Yarra. We have 3 towers that we service very regularly. And those communities don't have Wi-Fi in those towers, and they don't have access to information. And, you know, all of a sudden it was homeschooling and things like that. Most of those families didn't even have devices or access to internet. So my biggest concern was just getting in the car and giving, you know, because we're talking, sometimes those houses can be very 2-bedroom houses with 6 children in them. You know, we're not talking flash big homes, and, you know, what do you do with all the children suddenly not at school, and everyone on top of each other, and then this fear of COVID and things like that. So the first response was literally getting in the car, going and getting our pre-loved books, magazines and DVDs, and driving them around to the housing estates and handing them out, putting them at the base of the towers, allowing families to get those craft packs, activity packs, masks and information, because a lot of people were walking around and had no idea what was going on other than what they could see on the news. So there was a real cut-off for some of our most vulnerable community members. So it was really then also going and seeing what was happening on the ground and connecting with the local services. A lot of food support, you know, Vinnie's soup vans, things like that, everything had to shut down. So people's normal mechanisms for accessing food or support services, it was literally like everything was closed up, and they didn't have access to that. So there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of upset, and there was a lot of fear on the ground. So really just being around, taking books, taking activities, finding out what was happening, finding out that our Aboriginal community were very confused and very vulnerable, our Billabong barbecue crew that were meeting. So starting to look at, okay, how can we get food to them? They had regularly met at Collingwood Housing Estate every week. Things like that were being shut down. So people were turning up to services and wondering why they were closed. So going out and working with co-health organisations like our neighbourhood houses, and just seeing the emerging need for food because people were isolating, all those services have been shut off. So talking to our residents on the ground, and then talking to our local partners like Open Table and Cultivating Community, how are they going to financially survive when literally we're told we've got to lock down. So reaching out to them, like Cristina said, what was happening to all those businesses that just had to shut their doors? How did they exist? And working with them and saying, listen, Open Table are an organisation that work on rehoming food that would otherwise go to waste. So it has a really sustainable development goal lens with the work that they do. And they work with organisations like Second Bite, Oz Harvest, Food Bank, all of those sorts of places. How could we team up with them and maybe convert our library into a food relief centre? And look, it was very deliberate. Food was an essential service. So in order for us to be essential, we partnered with an essential service and made ourselves essential and used the food as the vehicle to find out, okay, what else is going on? How else can the library support you? How can we get you online? How can we give you digital access? Finding out what they needed and delivering those activities, masks and information. Every time the rules changed, it created confusion. So we would take out the flyers with the food packs and say, hey, this is what's changing. This is what needs to happen. So yeah, that's sort of how we, I guess, started in that space. And we fed about 75,000 mouths over that period of time through COVID. We delivered 400 parcels of food weekly for the whole pandemic, in and out of lockdowns. And I was also managing a whole team of casuals. It realised that also casuals just lost all their employment with this as well, with COVID. So we were working very closely with HR around how we could provide employment opportunities for casuals. So, and also we didn't want our library staff redeployed into areas. We wanted our library staff to do their work and be online and connect with community through their programming. So that was really important. So I was managing a team of 20 casuals down at St Mary's House of Welcome, because with all the changes, and our homeless community were put into hotels, but they didn't have any food. So, and St Mary's weren't allowed to have any volunteers on site. So as a council response, I was managing a team of 20 down there, rotating, packing food, and then also delivering out to all our homeless community across the state as well. So that was happening. Then we had all our library work happening and how that looked online story times and things like that. And then a whole food distribution hub at North Fitzroy Library before COVID started to hit the towers, which I think we'll talk about later on.
Amazing work, Kylie, and an amazing pivot from libraries to really change what you were doing and how you were doing it. And I did just want to say, I think you also delivered 40,000 books throughout the pandemic as well. And
yes,
that was just you alone, wasn't it?
Yeah,
yep.
My little Yarras. I can fit 25 to 30 boxes of books, just FYI, in that little car. So yeah, just driving that around, and yeah, it was great, to get that out. So yeah, and couldn't have done it without our partners as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Just such an amazing feat. I will come over to Lloyd again now. You spoke briefly before about how Victoria Police had to enforce the Chief Health Officer's directions, or the CHO. As we know, the CHO was very well known. What are some of the other, I guess, COVID activities that Yarra police officers were all of a sudden involved in that they just maybe weren't before?
Yeah, I think early when it was more prevalent overseas, there was a big focus on returning travellers. That was obviously where the virus was probably obviously going to come into the country. So there was a big focus on quarantining. If you can remember, when people returned from overseas, they were quarantining in hotels. So we did a lot of work around making sure that people were transported from the airports to the hotels and got in safely, so they weren't being exposed to the community. Obviously, as things progressed, we got more heavily involved in the hotel quarantine side of things to make sure that people were staying within their hotels to prevent the virus from getting out. So early days, that was probably one of our biggest focuses, was around those return travellers. But then as things progressed and the virus virus got out a little bit more, the Chief Health Officer's directions would come out, and then we'd have to start enforcing a lot of those. So, and they progressed over a period of time. So initially, when we went to full lockdowns, we had to enforce things like travel distances. I don't know if people remember, like you could only travel certain distances from your own home to go supermarket shopping. So all of a sudden we found ourselves checking people's licenses at markets and things like that to make sure they hadn't gone outside their 5Ks or 20K limits, things like that. We also had density limits in entertainment venues, which seems a little bit foreign now. We see the sporting events. I think it was 80-something thousand yesterday at the football, but there was density limits at venues. It was a thing to obviously try and keep them up and running. But we still had to make sure that they weren't exceeding those density limits. So it was really dependent on a lot of the directions that were coming out from the Chief Health Officer as to how we sort of went about policing that. Other thing that sort of evolved as it went through, we also started insisting to make sure that people were being compliant in staying at home. Once people were starting to test positive, they were quarantining at home. So we were involved in sort of compliance checks around those as well to make sure people were at home and doing the things that they should be doing. So we got a little bit involved with that. And then probably the more high profile stuff that we were involved in was probably those protest activities. They were obviously fairly high profile, and there was a bit of media around those. So obviously we had to get in, our members were sent to those as well from Yarra to manage those protest activities that were in contradiction of the Chief Officer's direction. So there's some of the activities that our Yarra members were involved in.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Lloyd. I'm going to come over to Cristina now, talking sort of a bit about restrictions there again. In Yarra, as I think we've mentioned a couple of times, we do have a really diverse community, and we have a large population of people whom English is not their first language, or there may be low English literacy levels as well. Cristina, how did your team work to deliver information on restrictions and services to Yarra residents?
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that we work in continuously at council. We're always looking at the best ways of sharing information from council with community, and the best ways of doing that. That's the most accessible ways. But this brought a level of urgency and need that we had never seen before, so it was quite crucial. The problem was there was lots of information around, lots of contradictory information as well, lots of really dense and hard to understand, information. I'm sure you all remember those times, and so it was quite a challenge. We worked really closely across council with all our wonderful teams, including especially comms and engagement, and I guess our main goals were trying to reach, those more hard to reach groups. We had the website, the web page up on council around where people can go for their first port of call for information around COVID. Often, what were the restrictions? Where can people go to get tested? All that sort of stuff, which further down the track became like second nature. But in those early days, we were all in the dark, really. So some of our goals were in at least trying to coordinate the efforts, coordinate the information. What was the most crucial information? Who were our key contacts? What were the best ways of getting that information out there, especially to our key sort of vulnerable groups that we work with in community development? It meant going through all of our contact lists and calling each and every one to see, who was still keen to be a contact person. Were they able to share information with their neighbours, their families, their community? How would they like to share that information? And so we were targeting predominantly people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds here. So we developed, we really, bolstered those contact lists that we had, and looked at a whole range of ways of connecting and sending those messages out. And so some people preferred phone calls, some email, some texts, some WhatsApp groups. So we developed a whole plethora of ways of getting that information out there. I also need to mention that, great partners with North Richmond Community Health and Co-Health, which you've also mentioned, and the amazing work that they've done in this whole area. And really a whole session could be devoted just to that. Yeah, we found that having a multi-pronged approach, having lots of different ways of sharing that, information, whether it's just a JPEG, or, picture, we really tried to be a bit more creative with how we shared that information. One of the early projects that we were involved in was with, and it took me back actually. Remember DFFH? They were called something else before in the early days, DHHS, and it sort of I forgot all about that, and I was like, yeah, we did a project in that that flyer, which you've got up there, is one of those projects that we did in collaboration with community leaders and especially people living in the public housing estates. What was that information that was really crucial that people wanted to know? And they developed this, and we just assisted in that and sort of getting it all designed up. We got it translated into, I think, 15 community languages, and we got this out in the early days, along with, I think, the food program that Kylie was coordinating. That was fantastic. We're able to put these pamphlets in with all their wonderful bundles. And so that was just, another one of those, great collaborations. It was such a unifying, time, wasn't it, really? We all just got together and just hunkered down. I don't think I've worked that hard in my life, really looking back.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely a strange time at the time when you're in it, but you're right, Cristina, I don't think anyone had really worked as hard as they did in that time. I'm going to move over to Kylie again now, but just on the point of when the Flemington Tower went into lockdown, it was definitely on the forefront, I think, of all of our minds in Yarra, that we needed to, what could we do to try and ensure that that didn't happen here, or if it did happen, how could we be as prepared as possible for it? So Kylie, given your involvement with the emergency management team and the food relief team, what were some of the things that were involved in that first step to try to be proactive in it?
Yeah, look, that was a really interesting time because the cases were really moving really quickly. And as it looked like cases, because we were working very closely with North Richmond Community Health and Co-Health, because they were on site with the towers. And the first thing was testing, actually finding out the extent of the problem and how many people had COVID. So part of our, because we had the existing food systems going, part of what we were doing was we were incentivising people coming through to get tested as well. And then later on also incentivising vaccines, jabs and things like that. But it was mainly come down and get tested. Let's find out if you've got COVID, and you'll get books and food and clothing at the end of it. So we were sort of at the back of the testing, and very much the information was come down, find out if you've got it, how can we support you? And then also identifying who was positive and how we could best ensure that they isolated and getting food up to them quickly, because that was the main concern, because a lot of these community members don't have huge spaces for lots of food in there. They do live day to day, sometimes with their food and things like that. So that was the biggest, most pressing concern. So, at one stage, once it sort of had hit into one of the towers, we needed to feed pretty much, they needed to sort of work out, okay, who's got it, who's not, how do we sort of isolate this to stop the spread? That was the biggest thing. And, getting us all sort of dressed up in PPE and delivering food within 4 hours. And we were just lucky because we actually had the infrastructure and access to food. We were working with organisations like Fair Share, so it was easier for us to step that up until council had set up their emergency response centre. And that's when we were working, our director at the time was working very closely with the MERC and working out, okay, what's that point where we set up a real full-blown council emergency response, and that happened very quickly as well. But we were, I guess, those initial responders, and then going across to North Melbourne and having a look at the setup. They were very generous in sharing all their learnings from their experience, and learning not to lock people into their houses and make them feel like they were caged in. So doing it very respectfully, and you know, hats off to CoHealth and North Richmond Community Health with their proactive testing. They were door knocking and providing everybody in the homes that were testing positive with the support, or with that delay of the 24 hours. Here's a whole heap of food parcels, so you can just stay in your home and isolate until we know where we're at. So they did an absolutely brilliant job, and I guess learnt from the Flemington experience. Not to say that they did anything wrong, it's just you're all running around and just trying to do the best thing and contain things, and it can be quite chaotic. And at the end of the day, you're just trying to look after people, and because we had been in that space, it was just easier for us to step into that. But yeah, Fliss and I up you know, knocking on people's doors, and also taking the activities at 8 and 10 o'clock at night. And I'll never forget, you know, there was a family with 6 kids, and the 2 parents had both had COVID, and we dropped off a whole heap of food, but the kids were just so excited when they opened the door and saw all the activities and the books and things like that. They were delighted. You could just hear them squealing down the corridor. So, you know, that was some of the experience of what we had. And, you know, I think when we were talking about this prior, you didn't realise how risky it was. We weren't vaccinated at that point. You know, we were very much front line, and yeah, the PPE gear and all the processes really kept us safe, which was really important as well. So yeah, it was, I think that proactive testing and really the communication was amazing, and we were just lucky to be part of that.
Thanks, Kylie. And I might ask Cristina as well, because I know you were obviously a part of, you know, working closely with emergency management. So what were some of the things that you were a part of, or that you saw were happening to be proactive in that space?
Yeah, I mean, it was really great because council has had a strong commitment to its casual labour force. It were, you know, potentially going to be, you know, unemployed, and, you know, deploying people from other areas. And so we saw this as an opportunity to be directly involved in this space. And so there was a massive effort in coordinating food relief. We had a central phone number people could call. We had social workers making assessments on people's needs, and you know, what were their dietary needs, did they need medicines, what other needs did they have, all that sort of stuff. And that was coordinated through council. And Kylie was much more heavily involved. Please jump in, Kylie. I'm sure there's things I'll miss, but it was a different approach that we took to other councils who contracted this sort of work out. But I think it really brought us together, made us a bit more of a unified workforce, and people really loved the opportunity to be involved in this. You know, everyone wanted to help. That's the thing. Everyone wanted to help. You know, volunteers were mentioned before. All the usual suspects, all the usual organisations who are involved in this space had to shut down, send all their volunteers home. So there were lots of people with great, with you know, who wanted to do good for the community, and so this is a really good way of doing that. So yeah, for many months, council staff helped with that practical food distribution. There was a massive coordination of that. And these collaborative partnerships that began sort of ensured the success of, like, even in terms of the vaccination sort of engagement time, and working so closely with CoHealth and North Richmond Community Health and DFFH meant that we could you know, also really push that messaging around the vaccination engagement as well, which was great. And I mean, emergency management you know, is really key, you know, is also about prevention. And so they really wanted to ensure that, you know, after this response, that there's some resilience building for communities so that they're better equipped for the next time there's an emergency, I guess.
And I think you've hit it on the head too, Cristina. And same with the network, what I got a sense of was how much everybody cared about their community, and everyone just chipped in, and there was so much collaboration with VicPol and everyone just wanted to keep people safe, and that was first and foremost, and everything that everybody was doing was really about care for their community, which really shone through. And it was lovely to see, really heartening to see, because like Cristina said, never worked so hard in all our lives, just exhausted. Council services often get a really bad rap, because we're related to rates and bins and things like that. But all I saw was everybody wanting to help everybody and caring. And certainly some of the community members that we've worked with have come back with a totally different outlook and appreciation of what council do, right from the staff that were taking those phone calls to the end result with the staff members delivering it. It was just a really heartening experience in amongst all of that upset as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we saw that from the network's perspective as well. Everyone's sort of coming together. And I think, as I said, there were 33 organisations, 83 members. A chunk of those members were council from different teams all coming together for that as well. I might just ask Lloyd now, just looking at those proactive measures. We spoke a little bit last week about some of the things that police had to prepare for if we were going to have to lock down a tower. Can you talk a little bit to that? Yeah,
look, from my perspective, being the Merc at the time, having those experiences from North Melbourne and Flemington were very valuable. And a lot of, for me, preparation and planning was the key. And that's what the network was able to offer us, that preparation and planning, because a lot of the issues that we probably saw with what happened at North Melbourne and Flemington was what the network was trying to address. So when you talk, Kylie, about all that information, that's really important. There was a lot of people that probably didn't know what was going on. Getting that information out, it was really key. Having all those support networks available, food resources available, people that we can lean on, and different organisations that I was already aware of, that in the event that something similar was to happen in Yarra, we'd already have addressed that through the network, which was really positive for me in terms of preparation and planning. From a Victoria Police owned perspective, though, I had to consideration what sort of resources would be required if one of those towers had to go into quarantine, what our police response would look like. So a lot of preparation and planning had to go into that. But I just knew through the network that a lot of the issues, it's one thing to lock down a tower, it's all those social issues afterwards that cause a lot of the problems. So, and I just knew through the network, I had contacts that people I could speak to. I knew I'd probably, if anything was to come up, we'd resolve those problems pretty quickly, because I knew what was available to me and what different organisations could offer if we were required to be recalled upon in the event that one of those towers had to quarantine. So the network was really invaluable for me. Thank God we didn't have to lock down the towers like we did in North Melbourne and Flemington, but if we had to get to that stage, I think we're fairly well prepared through the network and all the work that everyone did. So, like I said, for me, from a planning perspective, that's all I could ask for, is having those resources available to me.
Now, I am just a little bit aware of time here at the moment, so I think I will try to wrap us up somewhat quickly. So I'm going to skip ahead. So panel, I apologise for this a little bit. But I think I just want to quickly touch and hear from everyone on what are some of the programs that I guess you implemented to keep people connected, and also in conjunction with that, what are some of the things that are happening now that are a good takeaway for you? And we'll try and keep it to a minute each. So Rachel, I might come to you first. What were some of the programs that we had, and then what are some things that are still ongoing?
Yeah, sure. So Alycia, we had the speaker series, which Alycia manages with Rebecca, which is terrific. That's ongoing. And we managed to secure some funding from state government to be a community connector within Yarra. And the community connector program was essentially to allow LGAs to set up what we'd already done with the network. So we were a step ahead, I think, in Yarra, no surprise. And out of that funding, we managed to set up a number of different projects. So we had Women of Strength, which was to reduce isolation, particularly for cold women. We had a project called Space for Us, which was about re-engagement of people from marginalised groups. We definitely set up young person groups and forums. We worked with other agencies to have digital literacy programs, etc. So there were, and we had women's circles, which have been ongoing as well. So yeah, lots of different projects really aimed at reducing that isolation that everyone was feeling and the impact of that. And so some of those are still continuing, and that's great to see. Thanks, Alycia.
Thanks, Rachel. And Lloyd, we spoke last week about some of the things that had to fall away, but what are some of the things that, you know, we're able to keep and also looking forward?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, a lot of our programs did have to fall away, especially our youth programs. We had like basketball, soccer programs that were run by our youth resource officers. We had a Blue Edge program that was running at Fitzroy High School. So unfortunately, a lot of those proactive programs did have to fall away through COVID. But what we did find was engagement with the community in some of our not full lockdown situations. So, you know, we worked with a lot of licensed premises. I think they were called parklets, you know, when we had the parking used for outdoors dining and things like that. So we worked with them. We worked with event organisers to make sure that they were compliant in terms of whatever the current show restrictions were. So we actually found ourselves engaging with the community a lot more through an education piece, just to make sure through event organising that they were compliant and with what the community's expectations would be when it comes to holding events under certain restrictions, but not full lockdown restrictions, obviously. So that's in terms of some of the programs that we tried to do in terms of making people still feel connected and just making sure that they were being compliant with whatever the current show restrictions were.
Thanks, Lloyd. And I might go to Kylie and then I'll come to you, Cristina. So Kylie, a couple of the adaptations and then what's going on now for you guys.
Yeah, so a lot of our programs obviously had to go online, and we have continued almost like a hybrid model. So, but we're certainly getting back from our community. Most of our community, they want to come back in person. So, and we're open now, and we're in and out of so many different restrictions. And I think the biggest relief is that we're no longer in a punitive state of not allowing people that aren't vaccinated to come into our space. That was a real shift to have to do concierge desk and check people's status coming into our spaces, because we don't have those conditions in our libraries. So it's been lovely to see that go away and those density limits. And we're looking at that hybrid approach of what programs we can offer online. As a result of all the food work, we have established a community pantry and a community freezer where we supply up to 400 frozen meals a week to community members and about the same amount of items through the pantry. And that continues. Our community lunches every Saturday continue. Our outreach has changed. Our community engagement has changed. We are now being asked to be everywhere, especially on the housing estates. And I guess those food relief programs we did in partnership with our organisations, now we're switching that to be food markets and information stalls and community forums, and a place where people can gather and come and interact with all the different services in the area. So we do a monthly market down at Atherton Gardens, and also support the monthly markets with Belgium Avenue and Collingwood Neighbourhood House as well. And that's quite regular, and that's probably a shift and something that will remain moving forward. So very much have that presence, and working with our partners even closer in, we were able to establish a Working for Victoria grant as a result of all this work. So 6 months of extensive community engagement, and also helping and assisting our local non-for-profits get back on their feet with that workforce as well. So yeah, so it's exciting times ahead, different times ahead, and we've created a real little digital community engagement team and network. I think that the point is that we've stayed in touch with the network and we're all working together now, and we've got those connections. And I think it's really important that we don't lose that we keep meeting and keep sharing our resources and working together. I don't want to lose that.
Thanks, Kylie. And Cristina, to you, what are some of the things that have remained and things to move for and look forward to?
Sure, I'll be super quick. So one of the things was the development of the Yarra Food Network, which was a coordination of all the food relief agencies in Yarra who previously had been operating fantastically, but obviously with the advent of the pandemic, then the need placed on them was much greater. And so forming this network was really great in terms of being a coordination point for troubleshooting, for sharing information, for building those relationships. And that's something that we're continuing, which is great. It's and we're looking now into the future for food relief in Yarra, and we'll be doing a bit of a conversational forum around this about what are the needs, because the needs are still there, they're still continuing. One of the one program combating social isolation is the library volunteer pilot project that we started with libraries, and that's continuing. That's pairing volunteers with paid staff to go into homes and read books and to make those connections, and a whole bunch of other stuff around digital literacy as well. And another one is the Bicultural Liaison Officer program, which very heavily modelled on the health concierge models that were operating at from North Richmond Community Health and Co-Health, and having 15 or so staff who were recruited from the housing estates who spoke about 14, 15 community languages, and really they were involved in the vaccine engagement. They were involved in the pop-ups with libraries, helping with digital, the certificates of vaccination certificates, and we're continuing employing those people at Yarra to help us engage better and to get information out to community better. But also it's an employment opportunity and training opportunity for people that previously wasn't there. So I'll stop there.
No, that was great. And I apologise to the audience because we've run out of time to take any audience questions, but I do want to do a big thank you to our panelists today. So Lloyd, thank you so much for your time. Cristina, Rachel and Kylie, it was wonderful to have you all here. To our audience members, I will be sending out a little feedback survey. It would be great if you could fill it out. Thank you everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your week.